Title: I was the only stranger at her aunt's funeral. She held my hand and said thank you. I sat in the back pew. A woman no one recognized, clutching an envelope I had never opened. The funeral home smelled of lilies and old wood, and every eye in the room turned toward me. A woman in black touched my shoulder and whispered, "Did you know my aunt?" I opened my mouth, but the truth felt too large for that quiet room. 6 months earlier, a box of letters had changed everything I thought I knew. My grandmother had kept a secret for 60 years, sealed inside a shoebox. Now the woman who wrote those letters was gone, and I had come to say goodbye for her. My name is Emma Walsh, and I grew up in Portland, Oregon. Believing my grandmother's life was ordinary, I never imagined that a stranger's funeral in Charleston would become the place where my own life finally began. 6 months before that funeral, I found my grandmother's letters while cleaning out her attic after she passed. They were tied with faded ribbon, addressed to someone named Vivian, and signed only with the initial R. I read them late into the night, my hands trembling as I realized my grandmother had loved a woman, Vivian Kessler. The letters said, "Had been the great love of my grandmother's youth, before family tore them apart." One letter described a summer in 1962 when they had planned to run away together and never did. I searched Vivian's name online out of pure curiosity, expecting nothing but an old, forgotten record. Instead, I found her obituary, published that very week, listing survivors including a grandniece named Sofia Delgado. Something in me needed to see the woman my grandmother had loved, even only through her casket. I booked a flight to Charleston without fully understanding why I felt this pull toward a stranger. The funeral home was small, decorated with white roses, and full of relatives who all seemed to know each other. I stood near the doorway, overdressed and out of place, feeling like an intruder in someone else's grief. Sofia Delgado approached me first, her dark eyes curious, her voice gentle despite her obvious exhaustion. "I'm sorry. I don't recognize you," she said. "Were you a friend of my Aunt Vivian's?" I told her a half-truth, that my grandmother had known Vivian long ago, decades before I was born. Sofia studied my face for a long moment, then nodded slowly, as if something quietly made sense to her. After the service, she pulled me aside and asked if I would stay for the small reception afterward. I almost said no, worried I was intruding on a family's private sorrow, but something kept me there. At the reception, Sofia found me again, holding 2 cups of coffee, offering one without a word. "Thank you for coming," she said, taking my hand briefly. "You're the only stranger who showed up today." Her hand was warm, and the gesture felt heavier than a simple thank you between 2 strangers. I didn't tell her yet about the letters, or about my grandmother, or the 60 years of silence. Something told me the truth needed time, and I wasn't ready to disturb her grief with it. Sofia asked if I would walk with her along the harbor before I flew back to Portland. We talked about nothing important at first. The weather, her job as a hospital nurse, my work as an archivist. She mentioned that Vivian had raised her for years after her own parents divorced when she was young. "She never married," Sofia said quietly. I always wondered why. She never really explained it to anyone. I felt the letters burning in my bag, the truth pressing against my ribs, wanting to be spoken. Instead, I asked about Vivian's life, her hobbies, the kind of person she had been before old age. Sofia's face softened as she described a woman who painted watercolors and hummed old songs while cooking. "She kept a photograph on her nightstand," Sofia said. "A young woman. She never told me who it was." My chest tightened, certain I already knew the answer to a question Sofia hadn't fully asked yet. We exchanged phone numbers before I left, promising loosely to stay in touch, the way strangers sometimes do. On the plane home, I stared at my grandmother's photograph, the same young woman from Vivian's nightstand. Weeks passed, and Sofia texted more often than either of us probably expected after a single afternoon together. She told me small things, funny hospital stories, The song stuck in her head. The ache of missing her aunt. I told her about my job, cataloging old letters and photographs for a historical society in Portland. Neither of us mentioned the strange pull we both seemed to feel whenever our conversation stretched past midnight. One night she called instead of texting, her voice tired after a long shift, asking simply how my day was. We talked for 2 hours about nothing and everything, and I forgot entirely about the time zone difference. I don't usually do this, she admitted quietly. Talk this much to someone I barely know. Me neither, I said, and meant it more than I expected to when the words left my mouth. A month later, she asked if I would come back to Charleston to help sort through Vivian's belongings. I told myself I was going for research, for the Historical Society, for anything but the real reason. The real reason was simpler and more frightening than I wanted to admit even to myself. Sophia's childhood home smelled of dust and lavender, boxes stacked high in a room untouched for years. We spent the first afternoon in comfortable silence, sorting photographs into piles labeled Keep and Donate. In one box, I found a photograph that stopped my hands completely. My grandmother laughing beside a younger Vivian. Sophia leaned over my shoulder, studying the image, her breath catching audibly against my neck. That's the woman from the nightstand photo, she whispered. Do you know who she is? I could no longer hide behind half-truths, not with her eyes searching mine for an honest answer. That's my grandmother, I said finally. Ruth Walsh. She and Vivian were in love. A long time ago. Sophia sat back slowly, absorbing the words, piecing together a lifetime of unanswered questions in seconds. That's why you came to the funeral, she said. You're not just a stranger. You're family. Almost. I nodded, ashamed I hadn't told her sooner, worried the secret had already damaged something fragile between us. Instead of anger, Sophia's eyes filled with tears, and she reached for the box of letters I'd brought. We read the letters together that night, spread across the living room floor like fragile evidence of a life. My grandmother had written of stolen afternoons, secret notes passed at church, plans for a future denied to them. One letter described the day Ruth's parents discovered the relationship and forced her into marriage within the month. They never saw each other again, I said softly. Not once. In 60 years. Sophia wiped her eyes and said, Vivian kept every single one of your grandmother's letters until she died. She never stopped loving her, I whispered, the weight of 2 women's stolen lifetime settling over the room. Sophia looked at me then, something shifting behind her expression, quiet and unmistakable and slightly terrified. I think that's why I couldn't stop thinking about you, she admitted. Even before I knew why. Neither of us moved for a long moment, the space between us charged with everything we hadn't said. I feel it too, I told her, my voice barely steady, my heart pounding against every careful instinct. She reached for my hand the way she had at the funeral, except this time she didn't let go. The next morning, Sophia made coffee and avoided my eyes, clearly unsettled by what had happened between us. I'm engaged, she said suddenly, staring into her mug instead of at me. His name is James. The words landed like a slammed door, and I felt foolish for letting myself believe in something impossible. I didn't know, I said carefully, trying to keep my voice from shaking with disappointment. We've been together 3 years, she continued. My mother adores him. Everyone expects us to marry next spring. I nodded and gathered my things, telling myself this was exactly why I shouldn't have come back at all. Emma. Wait, she said, catching my arm before I reached the door, her grip tighter than necessary. I don't know what I'm feeling, she admitted. But it isn't what I feel when I'm with James. I stood frozen, unwilling to push her toward a decision that wasn't mine to make for her. I should go, I said gently. You need space to figure this out without me standing here. I flew home to Portland that afternoon, carrying a hope I had no right to hold on to. Weeks of silence followed, longer and heavier than any silence we'd had since the funeral. I threw myself into work, cataloging other people's love letters while trying not to think about my own. My coworker Dana noticed my distraction and finally asked what was wrong over lunch one Thursday. I told her everything. The letters. The funeral. Sophia. The fiancé. The impossible tangle of history repeating itself. Sounds like you fell for someone who isn't free to fall for you back, Dana said bluntly. Maybe, I admitted. Or maybe she's just scared. The way my grandmother's family made her scared. Dana squeezed my hand and reminded me that some people need time to choose themselves, not just love. I wanted to believe that, but doubt crept in every night I checked my phone for a message. A month passed with only occasional texts from Sophia. Polite and distant. Nothing like our late-night calls before. I told myself to move on. To accept that some stories, like my grandmother's, simply don't get happy endings. Then, without warning, Sophia called me on a Tuesday night. Her voice thick with something I couldn't name. I broke off the engagement, she said. 3 days ago. I haven't told anyone except you. My heart lurched, caught between hope and fear. Unsure what her confession actually meant for us. Why are you telling me this? I asked carefully, refusing to assume more than she offered. Because you deserve to know the truth, she said. And because I can't stop thinking about that night. What does your family say? Asked, remembering my grandmother's story, remembering how it had ended for her. They don't know yet, Sophia admitted. My mother is going to be furious when she finds out. I felt fear settle low in my stomach, an old fear inherited from a grandmother I never fully understood. I'm scared of repeating history, I told her honestly. I don't want you to lose everything for me. This isn't just about you, Sophia said. I've been unhappy longer than I ever let myself admit. Sophia's mother, Carol Delgado, learned about the broken engagement at a family dinner 2 weeks later. Sophia called me afterward, her voice shaking, describing the shouting, the tears, the accusations thrown across the table. She said I was throwing away my future, Sophia said. She said James was the best thing that ever happened to me. What did you tell her? Asked, bracing myself for whatever answer might come next. I told her the truth, Sophia said. That I think I'm in love with a woman named Emma. The words hit me harder than I expected. Warm and terrifying all at once. Impossible to fully process. She hasn't spoken to me in 4 days, Sophia admitted. My father won't even look at me. I remembered the letters, the 60 years of silence, and felt sick imagining Sophia living the same story. I don't regret it, Sophia said firmly. For the first time in years, I feel like myself. Though, I worried the cost of that honesty might be higher than either of us had anticipated. I flew to Charleston again, unable to stay away while Sophia navigated her family's anger alone. We met at a small cafe near the harbor, both of us cautious, unsure how to define what we were becoming. I'm not asking you to fix anything, Sophia said. I just needed you here while it falls apart. I'm not going anywhere, I told her. And this time I meant it as a real promise, not a comfort. Over the next week, Sophia's mother refused every attempt at conversation, canceling plans and avoiding phone calls entirely. Her father, Manuel, remained mostly silent, caught between his wife's anger and something unspoken in his own eyes. One evening, Sophia's cousin Rachel warned her that Carol was planning to skip Sophia's upcoming birthday dinner entirely. She's punishing me, Sophia said, tears finally breaking through the composure she'd maintained for weeks. I held her that night, unsure of what to say, aware that words couldn't undo generations of fear. Your Aunt Vivian waited her whole life to be loved openly, I reminded her softly. Don't wait like she did. Sophia nodded against my shoulder. And for the first time since the funeral, I felt something like hope. 2 weeks later, Sophia decided to hold her birthday dinner anyway, inviting family whether or not they approved. She asked me to come, not as a stranger this time, but as the woman she loved. I hesitated, worried my presence would only deepen the rift between her and her mother. I want you there, Sophia insisted. If she can't accept that, I need to know now. Not later. The dinner was tense from the moment I arrived. Relatives exchanging awkward glances across the crowded table. Carol arrived 20 minutes late, her expression unreadable, refusing to meet Sophia's eyes as she took her seat. Halfway through dinner, Sophia stood and raised her glass, her hands trembling slightly around the stem. I want to thank everyone for coming, she said, especially those who came despite disagreeing with my choices. The room went silent, forks pausing mid-air, every relative waiting for whatever came next from Sophia. I loved Aunt Vivian my whole life, she continued, and I only recently learned why she never married. Carol's face went pale, her wine glass frozen halfway to her lips as Sophia kept speaking. Vivian loved a woman named Ruth, Sophia said. Emma's grandmother. They were forced apart 60 years ago. Gasps rippled through the table, relatives exchanging startled glances, clearly hearing this history for the first time. She spent her whole life alone because her family couldn't accept who she really loved, Sophia continued. I won't make that same mistake, she said, turning to look directly at her mother across the table. Carol stood abruptly, chair scraping loudly against the floor, and walked out without saying a single word. The silence that followed felt endless, broken only by Sophia's quiet, steady breathing beside me. I'm sorry, Sophia whispered to the room, but I won't apologize for loving Emma the way I do. Her father, Manuel, finally stood, walked around the table, and pulled Sophia into a tight, unexpected embrace. I'm proud of you, he said quietly. I should have said this to your Aunt Vivian years ago. The table erupted into quiet murmurs, some relatives approaching Sophia, others avoiding her eyes entirely. Later that night, Manuel found me alone on the porch, staring out at the dark Charleston street. I knew about Vivian, he admitted quietly. My mother told me before she died. I never said anything. Why not? Asked, surprised by the sudden confession from a man who had barely spoken to me before. Fear, he said simply. The same fear that's kept this family silent for 2 generations. I don't want that fear passed down to Sophia, he added, or to whatever comes after her. I thanked him, unsure what else to say, grateful for one small crack of light in a difficult night. Inside, Sophia sat alone at the emptied table, staring at the seat her mother had abandoned. She might never forgive me, Sophia said as I sat beside her, taking her hand gently. She might, I said. Or she might need time, like people sometimes do before they find their way back. Either way, Sophia said, I'm not going back into hiding. Not for her. Not for anyone. I believed her completely, and something in my chest finally settled after weeks of quiet fear. Carol didn't call for nearly a month, and Sophia struggled visibly with the silence from her mother. I moved some of my work remotely, splitting time between Portland and Charleston to be near Sophia during this. We fell into a rhythm together, cooking dinners, walking the harbor, slowly building something steady between us. One evening, Sophia found an old journal of Vivian's tucked inside a drawer we'd overlooked before. Inside, Vivian had written about waiting for a letter from Ruth that never arrived after their forced separation. She thought Ruth stopped loving her, Sophia said, reading aloud, her voice cracking on the final lines. I remembered my grandmother's letters, dozens of them, all addressed to Vivian, all seemingly unanswered over the years. Wait, I said, digging through the box. There has to be something we're missing between these 2 stories. Deep inside the shoebox, beneath the ribbon-tied letters, I found one addressed differently, marked Return to Sender. My grandmother's final letter to Vivian, apparently, had never actually reached her at all. The returned letter revealed the devastating truth. Ruth's mother had intercepted it, refusing to let it be delivered. Inside, Ruth had begged Vivian to run away with her, promising she still loved her after everything. They both thought the other gave up, Sophia said, tears streaming freely down her face now. 60 years apart, I whispered, because of one intercepted letter and two families too afraid to allow love. Sophia held the letter carefully, as if it were something sacred, something that finally explained a lifetime of sorrow. We can't let that happen to us, she said, looking up at me with fierce, tearful determination. We won't, I promised her, meaning every word with a certainty I hadn't felt about anything in years. That discovery changed something between us, deepening our resolve to build the life Ruth and Vivian never got. We decided to frame both letters together, a reminder of everything love can survive when finally spoken honestly. 3 months later, Carol finally called Sophia, her voice hesitant, asking simply if she could visit for coffee. Sophia invited her to the apartment we now shared, nervous but hopeful about what the visit might bring. Carol arrived carrying an old photograph of Vivian as a young woman, one Sophia had never seen before. I found this while going through your grandmother's things, Carol said. I think you should have it. Sophia studied the photograph, then looked up at her mother, searching for something beyond the simple gesture. I've been thinking about what you said at dinner, Carol admitted. About Vivian. About the fear passed down. I don't want to be the reason you hide who you are, she continued, her voice barely audible. I'm still learning, Carol said honestly, but I don't want to lose my daughter over old fears. Sophia reached for her mother's hand, the first real contact between them in nearly 4 months. Thank you, Sophia whispered, tears welling again, though this time from something closer to relief than pain. Carol looked at me then, hesitant but sincere. Emma, I'm sorry it took me this long. Thank you for coming, I told her, echoing the words Sophia had once said to me at a funeral. That spring, Sophia and I organized a small memorial garden at the cemetery where Vivian was buried. We planted white roses, the same flowers that had filled the funeral home the day we first met. Sophia's father helped dig the soil, quietly humming one of the old songs Vivian used to sing. Even Carol attended, standing a little apart at first, then moving closer as the afternoon wore on. We placed a small plaque beside the roses, engraved with both women's names, Ruth and Vivian, side by side. They're finally together. In a way, Sophia said, resting her head against my shoulder as we stood there. Because you found the courage they never got the chance to have, I told her quietly. Carol stepped forward and laid a single white rose beside the plaque, her hand lingering for a moment. For the family I want to be, she said softly, glancing between Sophia and me with quiet resolve. It wasn't perfect forgiveness, but it was a beginning. And beginnings were more than Ruth and Vivian ever had. A year after that first funeral, Sophia and I held a small ceremony in the same garden we'd built. Only close family attended. Carol seated in the front row beside Manuel, both of them smiling despite old fears. Sophia wore a simple white dress, and I wore my grandmother's brooch, pinned carefully near my heart. I used to think love like ours needed to be hidden to survive, Sophia said during her vows. But standing here, surrounded by people who finally chose us, I know that isn't true anymore, she continued. I promised her honesty, patience, and a lifetime of choosing her openly, the way Ruth never got to choose Vivian. We placed our own letter beside the memorial plaque, a promise that our story would never end in silence. People sometimes ask how I ended up at a stranger's funeral, holding a hand I didn't yet know. I tell them it wasn't really a stranger's funeral at all, but the beginning of my own story. Fendi.